My dad crippled me when I was just 14 years old. And after everything he put me through, my own sister still had the nerve to invite him to my wedding. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Talia and I grew up in a house where fear was louder than laughter. My father, Calvin, ruled everything. He had this way of walking into a room and sucking the air right out of it. You never knew if he was going to be calm or explode, and I learned early on that silence was the safest shield. But even silence couldn't save me most of the time. I wasn't the favorite child. That spot belonged to my little sister, Zarya. She was the princess in his eyes, the one who could do no wrong. I was the difficult one, just because I spoke up sometimes, just because I didn't bow down to every order. Whenever I tried to defend myself, I was accused of being disrespectful. It didn't matter if I was right or wrong. Calvin's word was law. Our mom, Loretta, tried her best, but she was always working double shifts to keep food on the table. That left us alone with him more than we ever should have been. Zarya and I used to whisper in the dark, under the covers, promising we'd always have each other's backs no matter what. She was my safe place back then, my only friend in that house. But everything changed one night when Calvin's anger went too far. That night left me broken in a way I could never undo. At 14 years old, one violent moment ended the life I thought I was going to have and forced me into one I never asked for. From that day on, nothing in my family was ever the same. And years later, when I was finally ready to build something beautiful for myself, when I thought the past was behind me, Zarya made a choice that cut me deeper than anything Calvin ever did. She invited him to my wedding. When I think back to my early years, what stands out most is how uneven everything felt. Calvin never hid who his favorite was. Zarya was his little princess. He spoiled her with pet names, soft tones, and a kind of patience he never once showed me. She could spill juice on the carpet and he'd chuckle like it was nothing. If I so much as sighed too loud, I'd hear, "Why you always got an attitude, girl?" That label stuck to me, the difficult one. It wasn't about what I did. It was about who I was in his eyes. If Zarya questioned him, it was brushed off as sass. If I said the same words, it was called disrespect. The rules bent around her, but for me they were sharp edges ready to cut. And every time he treated us differently, I swallowed it down, wondering why my father couldn't see me as more than a problem. Mama Loretta wasn't blind to it, but she was exhausted. She worked back-to-back shifts, sometimes gone before sunrise and home after midnight. She carried the weight of keeping the lights on and food in the fridge, and I never blamed her for being too tired to notice how bad things got when she wasn't there. Her absence left the two of us, me and Zarya, stuck under Calvin's moods. And when he was in one of his rages, there was no buffer. But at night, when the house finally went quiet, that was when me and Zarya found each other again. We'd crawl into the same bed, whispering about school, about dreams, about how one day we'd be free of his grip. She'd pinky promise me that no matter what, we'd always stick together. In those whispers, I believed her. I believed we were unshakable. Looking back now, those moments sting the most. Because I clung to her words like they were a lifeline. I thought nothing could break us apart. I thought my sister would always be my shield, the one person in that house who truly understood me. But the truth is, promises made in the dark are easy to break in the light. And the older we got, the more I realized just how fragile our bond really was. I was 14 the night everything broke. It started like so many other nights, Calvin barking at me, demanding I answer him the way he wanted. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the moment I opened my mouth, he snapped that I was talking back. That phrase was his favorite weapon. He could twist any word I said into disrespect. The argument grew hotter, his face twisted with rage. I remember the way his shadow filled the room, how his voice shook the walls. I stood my ground for a moment too long, and that was all it took. His hand shot out, shoving me hard. My body slammed into the railing, then I felt myself tumbling. Each step hit like a hammer until I landed at the bottom, the breath ripped clean out of me. The pain was like nothing I had ever known. My back screamed, my legs wouldn't move, and all I could do was cry out. Loretta's scream pierced the air next, raw and broken. She rushed to me, her hands shaking as she tried to keep me still, her tears falling onto my face. Zarya's voice was shrill somewhere in the background, begging him to stop, begging her to call for help. The house turned into chaos. Lights flicked on, the neighbors must have heard, and then the sirens came. At the hospital, the bright lights and fast voices blurred together. Doctors spoke words like spinal injury, long-term damage, and mobility support. I didn't understand it all, but I felt the weight of it settling in. Braces. A cane. A future rewritten in a single violent moment. When the police showed up, I thought finally someone would hold him accountable. But Calvin was smooth with his words, just like always. He painted himself as a worried father who had watched his clumsy daughter slip. He even put on tears, acting broken over what had happened. To the officers it sounded believable. To the doctors it was just another accident at home. And just like that he walked away untouched. No charges, no consequences. My life was shattered, my body forever marked, and the man who caused it all went home like nothing happened. That was the night I realized the truth. Pain could destroy me, but his lies would keep him safe. Recovery wasn't a straight line. It was a battlefield. Day after day I was dragged into therapy rooms that smelled like disinfectant and sweat. Straps tightened around my legs. Machines forced me to move in ways my body resisted. And every session ended with me biting down tears so no one would see how much it hurt. The doctors spoke about progress, but progress felt like a word for other people, not me. I wasn't running. I wasn't jumping. I was relearning how to simply stand without collapsing. At school, the world moved on without me. I watched from the sidelines as kids I used to race across the field kept chasing their dreams, while mine vanished. Teams that once called my name didn't even glance my way anymore. College scouts never came. Classmates stared with pity, whispered when I walked by with braces clinking on my legs. I could feel the distance grow with every step, like I was no longer part of their world. Zaria's distance hurt the most. At first she sat by my side, quiet and shaken. But slowly I began to notice the shift. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned pain, sigh when I struggled to keep up, and sometimes even say the words I dreaded most. Maybe you're just making it sound worse than it is. Those words weren't hers. They were Calvin's. She repeated his script, and it cut deeper than the injury itself. Loretta tried to patch everything together, working even harder to cover hospital bills while keeping the house running. But guilt clung to her. I'd catch her staring at me, lips pressed tight as if she was replaying that night over and over, wishing she had been there to block his hands, to take the fall instead. She apologized in small ways, packing my favorite meals, adjusting pillows under my back. But the guilt never lifted from her eyes. The nights I once shared with Zaria turned cold. The whispers, the promises of loyalty, they vanished. She spent more time away from me, more time soaking in his lies, until I realized I was truly alone in that house. That betrayal, slow and silent, hollowed me out in a way even broken bones never could. High school became a different kind of fight. The injury wasn't just on my body. It was stamped on how people looked at me. Some kids mocked the way I walked, dragging their feet in imitation. Others drowned me in pity, speaking slowly, offering help I hadn't asked for, as if I was fragile glass about to crack. Both felt like poison. I couldn't punch my way through it, so I sharpened my tongue instead. Words became my armor. When bullies tried to corner me, I cut them down with comebacks that left them red-faced. When teachers assumed I needed special treatment, I set them straight with a stare that dared them to say more. The more the world tried to shrink me, the louder I became. Even with that toughness, I knew staying in Calvin's house meant being swallowed whole. I set my sights on one thing: getting out. I took whatever jobs I could handle, saved every dollar, and mapped my escape. While my friends were dreaming about parties and dances, I was plotting my freedom. And the moment I had enough, I packed a bag and left without looking back. That first night on my own, in a small, dim apartment, I felt something close to peace for the first time. Zaria still called me sometimes. She'd ask about my work, my apartment, even my health, but there was always a tone beneath her words. It was subtle but sharp, like she was speaking down to me, like she saw me through his lens. If I mentioned an achievement, she'd brush it off with a casual, "Well, at least you're managing." It wasn't outright cruelty, but it carried the weight of judgment. Her voice was proof that Calvin's narrative had taken root in her. No matter how far I pulled away, he lived in the way she treated me. And that superiority turned our conversations into reminders of what I'd lost. The sister who once swore we'd be unbreakable together. Independence became my only safe ground. I built routines, built walls, and built a version of myself that didn't bend under anyone's opinion. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about carving out a life that was mine alone. I met Micah on a day that should have been ordinary. I was sitting in a cafe, books spread across the table, lost in work. He asked if the seat across from me was taken, And that simple question opened a door I never expected. He didn't stare at the braces on my legs. He didn't tilt his head with pity. He looked me in the eye, listened when I spoke, and laughed at my sarcasm like it was the best thing he'd ever heard. Our conversations stretched longer each time we met. He asked about my thoughts on books, music, even random debates about life. He wasn't drawn to me out of sympathy, he was drawn to the way I fought for every piece of my life. That difference mattered. For once, I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, I was defined by who I was. As weeks turned into months, he made space for me in ways no one else had. When we walked together, he never rushed ahead or slowed with forced patience. If I struggled with something, he didn't leap in to take over. He asked what I needed and respected my answer. That balance made me trust him more than I thought I could trust anyone. Love didn't hit like lightning. It grew like roots, steady and certain. By the time he held my hand under the stars and told me he wanted forever, I already knew I wanted it too. The night he proposed was quiet but powerful. No grand speeches, no audience. Just us in the living room, music low, his hands shaking slightly as he opened a small box. His words were simple. Life hasn't been fair to you, but I want to spend mine making sure you never face it alone. Tears slipped before I could stop them. Not because I felt broken, but because for the first time I felt whole. Saying yes wasn't just about him. It was about me choosing joy after years of pain, choosing to build a family on my own terms, one that no one could take from me. Planning the wedding was supposed to be a season of joy. Loretta threw herself into it with a spark I hadn't seen in years. Scouring fabric samples, flipping through magazines, talking nonstop about flowers and music. Micah was steady as ever, weighing in when I asked, making sure I never felt the weight of it all alone. For the first time, I could picture a future that looked nothing like the past. Zaria stepped in, claiming she wanted to be involved. At first, it felt like a bridge rebuilding between us. She suggested vendors, browsed dresses with me, even offered to handle little details. But as the weeks passed, her energy shifted. She stopped answering calls promptly, showed up late to fittings, and whenever I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with vague smiles. Her presence felt less like support and more like a shadow lurking at the edge of my happiness. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to stress or distractions, until the day she dropped the news that turned my stomach. We were sitting in my living room, lists spread across the coffee table, when she leaned back casually and said, "I invited Dad." The words landed like a slap. I froze, thinking I had misheard, but the calm look on her face told me she meant every syllable. Shock turned quickly into disbelief. The same man who had thrown me into years of pain, the same man who twisted truth to escape justice, was being welcomed into the most important day of my life. And not by strangers, not by distant relatives, but by my own sister. I asked her why, my voice sharp, breaking. She shrugged like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because he's still our father. He should be there. Her tone carried no shame, no hesitation, as if my scars didn't exist, as if my suffering was nothing compared to her version of family loyalty. That moment split something inside me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. My wounds, my history, my survival were brushed aside in favor of a man who had stolen everything from me. And the cruelest part was that the hand delivering that betrayal was the same one I once held in the dark, whispering promises of forever loyalty. The fight with Zaria came fast and ugly. I couldn't hold it in after hearing she had brought him back into my life without permission. Words flew out of me like fire, sharp and raw, demanding to know how she could possibly think it was acceptable. My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. Zaria didn't shrink. She lifted her chin and crossed her arms, her face set in stone. "He's still our dad," she shot back, the phrase like a knife. When I tried to remind her of what he had done, her tone only hardened. "You need to forgive at some point. You can't carry this forever." It was like she had become his mouthpiece, echoing lines I'd heard from him 100 times. Each word felt like a blow, not because they were new but because they were coming from her. The girl who once swore to shield me was now standing between me and my truth. I felt sick. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or fists. It can come with calm voices, with simple sentences that erase years of suffering. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just inviting him to my wedding. She was choosing him over me. Loretta couldn't stay quiet. She slammed her hand on the table, eyes blazing. "How dare you side with that man after what he did to your sister?" she yelled, her anger finally spilling out. She didn't try to smooth it over or make peace. She stood beside me without hesitation. For once, I saw the strength in her that had been buried under years of guilt and exhaustion. Zarya didn't budge. She argued back, her voice rising, calling me bitter, saying I was stuck in the past. Loretta shouted louder, her words shaking the room. I stood there in the middle, watching my family split apart piece by piece, my heart breaking even as my rage burned hotter. It didn't stay within our walls. The whispers started among cousins and aunts, some saying Zarya was right, others backing me and Mama. Suddenly my wedding wasn't just about love, it was a battlefield. And I couldn't believe the war had been ignited by the person I once trusted most. The morning of my wedding should have been filled with nothing but joy, but the second I caught sight of Calvin stepping through the doors, the air turned heavy. He walked in dressed sharp, acting like he belonged, his smile stretching wide as though nothing had ever happened. A few guests greeted him politely, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. My hands shook, but I refused to let fear take the day from me. I stood tall and faced him in front of everyone. My voice rang louder than I thought possible. I told the truth, every word he had buried under lies. I spoke of the night he crushed my body, of the years I fought to walk again, of the silence he forced on me with his manipulation. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. I ripped away the mask he wore, tearing down the family man image he paraded in front of people. The room went still. Guests who had smiled at him now looked at him with disgust. I saw Zarya's face pale, her confidence slipping as the weight of her choice became clear to everyone. She had defended him, protected him, and now she stood exposed. The shame that flushed across her cheeks was almost as sharp as the betrayal she had dealt me. Calvin's expression hardened, his charm slipping. He tried to speak over me, tried to twist the story as he always had, but this time it didn't work. Too many eyes were on him, too many ears had heard my pain. The more he denied, the more the crowd turned against him. Finally, anger replaced his act. He slammed his fist against the table, cursed under his breath, and stormed out of the hall. A handful of relatives followed him, faces tight with disapproval, clinging to loyalty that made no sense. But most stayed. They came to me, some with tears, some with embraces, all with words that showed where their support truly lay. For the first time I wasn't the one silenced, and he wasn't the one believed. What should have been a day stolen by fear transformed into something else entirely. It became the moment I broke his hold over me, not just privately but in front of everyone who had ever doubted my story. The chaos faded, but the ceremony still stood waiting. Micah took my hand, steady and sure, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. The whispers, the tension, even the footsteps of those who had followed Calvin out. None of it mattered. We spoke our vows with voices that carried more weight because of what had just unfolded. Promises of love and partnership were no longer just words. They were choices made in the fire of everything we had endured. When he slid the ring onto my finger, I felt the ground steady beneath me again. The celebration carried on, laughter breaking through the cracks left by conflict. Friends danced, relatives toasted, and for the first time in years, I felt a joy untouched by fear. But beneath that joy came a clarity I couldn't ignore. Zarya lingered at the edges of the room, her eyes avoiding mine, shame written across her face. Part of me wanted to reach out, to search for the sister I once believed would never turn on me. But another part, the stronger part, knew that reaching for her would only drag me backward. I realized then that I was finished begging for her loyalty. I had bent, forgiven, waited, and hoped, only to be shown again and again that she chose him over me. It was no longer my job to carry that disappointment. Family wasn't about blood, it was about trust, and she had broken it. When the night drew to a close, I stood with Micah and Loretta by my side, and I made the quiet decision that sealed everything. Calvin and Zarya no longer had seats in my life. I didn't need revenge, didn't need to watch them crumble. My victory was simpler, stronger. I was free of them. Walking away from poisonous ties wasn't loss. It was release. I had built a new family, one rooted in love, respect, and honesty. For the first time since I was a child, I wasn't surviving under someone else's shadow. I was living on my own terms. And that, more than anything, was the ending I had been fighting for all along. Do you think I was right to cut my father and sister out of my life, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.